We're heading across now to Melbourne, Australia, live to the Irish reporter based in Melbourne, Catherine Murphy. Morning, evening, good night, Catherine. How are things?
Lovely to talk to you, Shane. How are you?
Keeping well, thanks. We've been glued to this screen, trying to talk on air around the Andy Murray win over Matteo Berrettini here. But as Adrian said this morning, I mean, when he lost the fourth set, you're thinking, well, that's it. The tiebreak, it's done for Murray because his body can't hack the fifth set. But he pushed on, and a dramatic win for Andy Murray this morning.
Unbelievable. I literally cannot believe what I've just watched, Shane. When he went 2 sets up, I'm not going to lie, and this is a terrible thing to say, I said to my camera off, we're outside, it's 38 degrees. After the bulletin, I said, that's going to go 5. It's just so Andy Murray for this to go more than 4 hours, and it's going to go 5 sets. And sure enough, it did. Now, I didn't know that he'd also add in, saving a match point, a super tiebreaker. I'm so happy for Andy Murray because he's worked so hard to get to this point. It's funny, the other day a photo popped up on my social media, a photo from 6 years ago. Andy Murray was one of the first really high-profile tennis players I ever interviewed, and he is an absolute gentleman on and off camera. He is so funny. He is so kind to everyone on the tour. He's so well liked. It's been such a journey for him when you consider where he's been. Right here in Melbourne in 2019, I was in the player tunnel when he played that infamous 5-setter against Roberto Bautista Agut, which he lost to the Spaniard because his hip was so bad at that point. He pretty much announced before the tournament that this might be his last, that he was looking like he was going to retire. And I remember looking down the tunnel and he couldn't even lift his bag up. He was grimacing with pain. But then when he came into the view of TV cameras and the audience, he kind of straightened up. He wanted his opponent to at least think he was okay to play. Then, of course, we had the retirement, but not really a retirement because he kind of changed his mind in the post-match interview. They played a big tribute to him and he was like, hang on, I might get surgery, I might come back. If someone told me that day that in 2023 I'd watch him play for almost 5 hours with a metal hip and defeat Matteo Berrettini, I just wouldn't have believed it. I can't believe what I've just seen.
It's pretty crazy, isn't it? I mean, 4 years after that 2019 Australian Open where you think this is it for Murray and he's still putting the crowd through 5-setters at Grand Slams. And a fan favourite there too, I'm sure, Catherine. I mean, it's a different atmosphere this year than the COVID years, of course, at the Australian Open. So I'm sure the crowd there were right behind him in the stadium.
They were going crazy. And can I give a shout out to the chair umpire, Mohamed Layani, and I really hope I'm pronouncing his name properly. I've never worked on any of his matches. He has this way of emphasizing every word. And when he said Murray, he said it real deep and the crowd started chanting along with him. I tried to count them all. There was at least 10 Scottish flags in the crowd. Then, of course, there's a huge Italian contingent in Melbourne and they were so vocal too. I feel like this 5-setter has really brought the Australian Open to life. Because last night on Rod Laver Arena, yesterday, I have to admit that we were all a little bit flat because Nick Kyrgios withdrew. It was so sudden, Shane. I was in the middle of a bulletin, a 10-minute bulletin. He actually withdrew and did his press conference within 10 minutes. We were all so disappointed. Then last night in Rod Laver Arena, Iga Swiatek, who's been so dominant, the world number one, she went through in straight sets. Daniel Medvedev only dropped 3 games against Marcus Giron of the US. So I think the Australian Open really needed this 5-setter and there's just such a buzz around the place this evening.
You mentioned about Murray, Catherine, limping after one of her matches in the most recent years. He seemed to be hobbling a small bit after this one as well. Just looking at the draw and how it stacks up, I've watched the Breakpoint documentary, so I'm suddenly an expert in Kokkinakis, and he's a high-ranked player, and Fognini, they're going to meet for the right to meet Murray in the next round. But having beaten a seed of Berrettini's ranking, the draw really opens up for him now.
It does open up for him, but this is the one thing that kills me with these Andy Murray matches. And that's why when he was 2 sets up, I was like, Andy, do it for your metal hip. For God's sake, can you just finish this one in 3? Because you want to see him be competitive in his next round. Now, you saw on TV, I was watching him really closely at the end. I think, this is just me sitting in my seat in the stadium, that he could barely walk up to his chair. He was so good. He was actually, do you notice, I don't know if they showed it on TV, he insisted on cleaning up his area so the ball kids wouldn't have to do it, like picking up all the water bottles off the floor. It took him ages, but he did look like he was almost struggling to walk. So I just hope that he recovers well. Thanasis Kokkinakis is a really interesting one. It's so sad, as you know from Breakpoint, him and Nick Kyrgios won the doubles last year, and they just brought such an amazing energy to the whole tournament. Such a shame we won't get to see them in doubles, but that Fognini-Kokkinakis match will be interesting. It's never dull with Fabio Fognini, that's for sure.
It's unbelievable, really, Catherine, isn't it? I mean, like the fact that he's battled for 5 hours out there on court with his metal hip against a player like Matteo Berrettini, who at 5-4 had the game at his mercy, and as I said, Murray saving a match point as well. So to put that in perspective, it's up there in recent years, certainly, with one of Murray's top moments.
It is. This is a match we will never forget. It's one of those moments where you're in Rod Laver Arena and you know what you're witnessing. It gives me goosebumps to hear him talk like that. He deserves this so much. And also in that post-match interview, because obviously the winning point was a let, he said, you know, I got a bit lucky in the end. You work really hard to get that lucky. He's such a good guy. Don't you just love it when good guys have good things happen? So I can't help but just be so over the moon for him. I'll tell you, Shane, I often talk to the ball kids about who's their favourite player, because they obviously are behind the scenes and they interact with the players all the time. And by the way, they sign confidentiality agreements, so they can't say anything negative. But they always pick out Andy Murray and his brother Jamie as just good guys to deal with. So I'm just so happy for him.
I wonder where they'd rank Nick Kyrgios on that list. And it was the subject of my next...
They do love him.
Do they?
Yeah. They do love him.
That was what I wanted to ask.
He's a superstar and he brings a vibe.
You didn't get a sense from the documentary. One thing I didn't get a full sense of from the documentary was his relationship with the Australian people. Was there universal disappointment that he was out from a being on his side point of view?
I'll give you my perspective of it, which is just one perspective. So I love Nick. I've known Nick for many years. He's always been great to deal with. I've found him to be really good. You can only judge people on how you find them yourself. He's always been controversial and he is really polarizing. So to give you an example of how polarizing he is, I was doing a radio cross yesterday on a talkback show. And as I was speaking and talking of my disappointment and saying what a blow it was to the tournament, the text line on that radio show was lighting up with people saying, I won't miss him, he's a disgrace, all of that. And the presenter said to me, just so you know, this is the text line. But guess what? Those people would have still been watching him. He's so unpredictable. And you know what, Shane, I'm very grateful to him. He's made tennis more popular. He's brought bigger crowds to the tennis. I love the game. I want more people to love the game. I'm really happy that Netflix has given people an insight into the personalities, because even more so on the women's side of the draw, because Serena's gone and Ash Barty's gone, we need to get to know these players' stories more so that we can really buy into them and support them. So anything that makes tennis more popular, and Nick Kyrgios is king of that, I'll support it.
What are you hearing, Catherine, about the Djokovic injury or non-injury, this hamstring difficulty that we're hearing about? He's, of course, going for a golden year of Grand Slams. Is the reported injury as serious as people think, or is it just a non-story?
Do you know what? I'm afraid to even talk about it, because I can't help thinking, Shane, about last Friday night when we were all watching that exhibition match between Djokovic and Kyrgios, and we're all monitoring Djokovic to see how his hamstring is, and we're looking on the wrong side of the net. We had no idea that Nick Kyrgios had been struggling, that he was going to withdraw. I know the tournament organisers of the United Cup were completely blindsided when he pulled out. So with Djokovic, to me, he looks really happy, and you saw him in that exhibition dancing around. That's not, to me, someone who is concerned greatly about an injury. No doubt there is a twinge there, and I don't think Novak Djokovic, some players, they hide their twinges more. And I think with him, we always see it if he's injured. And Daniil Medvedev kind of alluded to that in the way he was almost kind of saying to Djokovic across the net, mimicking him, saying, you know, come on, you don't need to act up when you have a twinge. But who knows? I don't feel it's a huge problem. I really hope it's not a big problem, because it's been great to see him get a great reception here after what happened here 12 months ago. It's great that Melbourne and Australia has moved on from that. Speaking
of Melbourne and Australia moving on from, I mean, those COVID years, even last year's atmosphere at the tournament and around the city, Catherine, I'm sure it is in stark contrast to this year, where there's back to the party atmosphere and the carnival atmosphere. How do you compare this year's tournament in terms of atmosphere with recent years?
Do you know, there isn't even a comparison to last year, for example, because you know the way when you're in something, you don't realise that things are a bit weird. And of course, there was a cap on crowds for a lot of the tournament. But because there were so many fairy tale stories after what happened to Djokovic, which was a nightmare, you know, with Ash Barty, with the special Ks, it was a very special tournament. But it's now only that yesterday when the gates opened, and it was 100% capacity. It ended up being a record attendance here at the Australian Open. I think there was about 75,000 people here in Melbourne Park, and they're expecting a record for the tournament. Now, it'll be interesting to see if Nick Kyrgios' withdrawal affects that, because he's not the only withdrawal. The tournament's also without Roger Federer, who's retired, Ash Barty, Venus Williams withdrew, Ajla Tomljanovic, who is the top-ranked Australian female. And I think I can hear Thanasi Kokkinakis going on to the court. Certainly no attendance issues in that stadium. It sounds like it's absolutely jam-packed. But there's no comparison. This is, I think, and I'm probably a little bit biased because I adore the place, but I think this is the best sports event in the world, without doubt. And I've been to the French Open, and it doesn't even compare to the Australian Open.
Catherine, we're looking at the draw then on both sides opening up. A few surprise results already, as we've already said. Berrettini last year semi-finalist getting knocked out, but already Rublev beating Dominic Thiem as well, 6-3, 6-4, 6-2. So some big names falling. Casper Ruud, I know, is out on court this morning around 9:15 a.m. or so Irish time, I think. And then on the women's side of the draw as well, Iga Swiatek, one of the favourites. It's fairly competitive on the women's side of the draw. How do you see both sides playing out? I suppose on the men's side, Djokovic is the man to beat.
Yeah, for sure. Djokovic is the overwhelming favourite to win his 10th title, and we know how he deals with adversity. We know that he loves to really come back. When you back him into a corner, he's a very dangerous person to meet in a draw. So he's absolutely the favourite. On the women's side of the draw, Iga Swiatek is so dominant. She's been dominant for so long. However, in the build-up to the Australian Open, she was playing in the United Cup for Poland, and they were taking on the US. And she got beaten by Jessica Pegula, the American. Now, Jessica Pegula is from a very famous family. They own the Buffalo Bills, for starters. I think they own some other sports teams in America. So from a very sporty background, she had played Iga Swiatek 4 times in 2022, and she never managed to beat her. Then she comes up with this massive win in the United Cup, an easy victory, straight set, 6-2, 6-2. Iga Swiatek, after that loss, what was most intriguing was she was sobbing under her towel. So she was asked in press, why were you so upset about this loss? And she said she felt helpless against Pegula. She felt like she just couldn't problem solve against her. She just felt like she was really outdone on that day. Now, I would keep my eye on Jessica Pegula. She had a really easy straight sets win yesterday, and she's determined to have a good run at the Australian Open. But then there's Ons Jabeur. You'll get to know her really well in the Netflix documentary. She's from Tunisia. She is so popular. She's been to 2 Grand Slam finals, and she revealed in a press conference yesterday that She has trophies on her phone that she wants to win this year. She wouldn't reveal which Grand Slam trophies, and it was Catherine Whittaker of the Tennis Podcast asked her that question. So she has big ambitions. She's so popular. She'd be a great story. But I just have a feeling about Jessica Pegula. Hope I haven't jinxed her, because I'm rarely right. So apologies to Jess.
Catherine, before we let go, I know you're laser focused on the tennis at the minute, but I did want to ask you about Eddie Jones. There's a couple of stories in some of the English papers today. The Telegraph saying revealed Jones' secret 14 months of Australia talks. This story just keeps on giving. And then in The Guardian, the RFU decided against inserting a clause in his severance package about talking to rivals for the World Cup for legal and moral reasons, so that the door was open to him. What's been I've asked you earlier on about the response to Nick Kyrgios, the response in Australia to the appointment of Eddie Jones on a 5-year contract?
I couldn't believe this yesterday morning. This story was so big that we move our sports bulletins out to the tennis, and I ended up leading with rugby, not tennis, on day one of the Australian Open. There's been a mixed response, but for the most part, a great response. Dave Rennie's a really good guy, I should say that, and there's always such a human side to this. I'm sure it was his dream to coach at a Rugby World Cup, and I hope him and his family are okay, because he was so lovely to deal with always. But Eddie Jones, I believe, is what Australia needs right now. Dave Rennie has a very different coaching style. Now, the big story will be this year in Australia is how the players cope with that change in coaching style. So Dave Rennie is the sort of guy that's all about love and connection. I'll play my guitar for you. You know, he would literally have a sing-song with the players. And then you hear the stories about Eddie Jones telling people, you know, to drink a cup of wet cement or sending cement to people's houses. There are many stories about how tough Eddie Jones is. So how they'll go from that affectionate love to very tough love is going to be interesting, but I'm relieved. I feel like it gives Australia a chance, and of course they could be on course to meet England in the quarter-final. And I've been speaking to some of the BBC journalists, and without stating the obvious, there's no way England want to face sacked Eddie Jones in charge of Australia. That would just be a prospect that they don't want to deal with, that's for sure.
For the rest of us, it better happen. It just better happen.
Yeah, we're licking our lips at that prospect.
It'd be so good. It would be so good. I am hoping and praying for that quarter-final, but the main thing I'm hoping and praying for is for Ireland to do well and make it past the quarter-final. That's my top priority. But second priority would be seeing that quarter-final matchup. It would be amazing.
100%. It will be absolutely brilliant. So the build up to the Rugby World Cup continues. Catherine, you've been brilliant with your time. Thanks a million as always. No doubt we'll check in again before the end of the Australian Open.
Pleasure. Love to talk to you anytime. Have a great day.
Great stuff. Catherine Murphy there, Irish journalist based in Melbourne, Australia with ABC Sports.